Andrew, I got to tell you, I was very excited to celebrate the fact that with episode 7 of God versus God in Roman numerals, we've now reached triple digits. Now, it's quite an accomplishment. I prepared a witty monologue to mark the occasion, maybe even a little light musical number. Before I could deliver it, our crack production staff informed me that we had already, in fact, reached triple digits in episode 3.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
With I. So I know what you must be wondering. First, how can your co-host be so inept at Roman numerals, which is fair? Second, where did this production staff come from? But I have no answers to either of those questions. Nonetheless, I am pleased that we are at episode 7. We'll be breaking into quadruple digits in our next installment, if my Roman math is correct. But first things first, episode VII, where we begin. A quick bit of listener mail, as I like to throw in. Of course, the end of episode 5, Prometheus versus the Moirae. You'll recall that I enacted a scene in our final category, Matinee Idol, in which the eagle who was feasting on the liver of Prometheus was portrayed by my impression of the great comedian Gilbert Gottfried. Now,
late great.
I don't know if you read the papers, but sadly, Mr. Gottfried ended up dying just a few weeks later. One listener then wrote to warn me, in light of this, I should really be careful about which people I do impressions of in future episodes. So I will certainly take that advice to heart, as I do that of all of our listeners. And I want to be very clear. I would never wish any one individual harm, even if that one person was doing terrible harm to others in the world.
All right.
Unrelatedly, I may be working on a Russian accent just in case if I should change my position. But for now, that will be my policy. So without further ado, God versus God, episode 7. We're going Hecate versus Artemis this time. And as always, may the best God win. I'll begin with Hecate. So, Andrew, one challenge I found in this show, and maybe you have too, is it's tricky sometimes to get the pronunciations correct. You know, people like the two of us will read a lot about mythological figures, but it's pretty rare that they come up in spoken conversation. As one example, back in our second episode, we both needed a little work to get the name of the goddess of the harvest correct. You know, is it Demeter, Demeter?
Correct. Yeah.
More. We had to work through it. It took some effort. Now, for this episode, as always, we let the fates decide. Went to our deity selection tool. I drew Hecate. But until doing a little digging, I had heard her name in my head differently. I had always heard it as the rhyme of the fine Mexican golden lager known as Tecate.
Yeah. Which,
of course, is born and brewed in the Baja California town that bears its name. So it was always Hecate for me, like Tecate. So in my mind, I also had a bit of a visual image. I'd always pictured that Hecate, or as I will call her now, Hecate, had a certain sort of coastal Mexico flair. You know, she was doing her goddess duties, probably by the beach, maybe like a little tasteful, maybe 2-piece with a sheer cover-up, a bucket of Tecate bottles on ice, maybe a couple lime wedges. You know, you get the idea. Side of taquitos, guac, maybe even like accompanied by a trusty chihuahua. Well, that was the image in my head. And I will tell you tonight, Andrew, upon further review, this is not the case. This is not at all. She is, in fact, the Greco-Roman, not Mexican, goddess of many things: boundaries, crossroads, witchcraft, the moon, necromancy, and ghosts. So a lot to pack in to the plate of Hecate. And, you know, she is a lesser known deity. We kind of have to piece together little fragments that we get over the years, but still some good kind of darker, kind of spooky stuff related to her for the episode. So should be interesting. Now, back to her origin story. Hecate is the only child of Perseus and Asteria. So she is from the less famous, less well-known sort of Titan side of the family. There are a few accounts that have her as a child of Zeus. Now, that's always possible, given Zeus's legendary fecundity. But that's a rare part of the story. So most people agree in the span of history, Perseus and Asteria are the predominant opinion. We'll stick with that. Now, we've seen instances where there are certain deities who become kind of merged. They are associated with each other over the years, even equated. They kind of become the same thing. We heard about that a little bit with Helios and Apollo. You know, Helios's reputation went a little down. Apollo kind of took it over and became the god of the sun. It is a thing that happens over the course of time. Oddly enough, Hecate very early on was associated with Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the very subject of the next section,
Right.
and her opponent in this episode. So the fates have thrown us a bit of a curveball on this one because they were, in fact, essentially the same figure at the beginning.
Right.
I expect we will still rise to the occasion, but it will be a singular experience for us. Now, when Artemis was eventually elevated into the pantheon of the Olympians, there was this kind of schism, a kind of split that occurred within at least the Greco and Roman cultures. So Artemis, as I'm sure you will discuss, took on the kind of the bright side, the side of purity and maidenhood. I'm sure you'll talk about that. In contrast, though, Hecate kind of took on the darker aspects, the magic, the casting of spells, spending time with the souls of the dead, being worshipped at night, and as we will learn shortly, took on a coterie of very strange animal companions throughout all this darkness and magic. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Hecate's origins. We do know that she does help the Olympians defeat the remaining Titans in the Gigantomachy, which is another great exercise for pronunciation. She took on the tongue. It really does. It takes some work. She slayed the giant Clytius using what we will find out to be her weapons, these very powerful torches. So even though she, again, came from the Titan side, ended up joining the Olympians, took a big part of that battle. As a result, was really in good favor with Zeus for the remainder of their days. So even though she was from the Titan strain of the family tree, she was in good graces with the Olympians. Originally, we also know that her name was spelled as Hecate, Hecat, without the final E. Who would you suspect added that final E much later in the story?
I would have no idea.
You would not guess. None other than William Shakespeare himself decided he alluded to her in Midsummer Night's Dream, King Lear, even the Scottish play, whose name I will not recount on air. Right. I assume it just fit his iambic pentameter, it fit his rhythm, and if you're Shakespeare, you can get away with that. So the bard says it sticks. So from then on, from Shakespeare's time, it became Hecate as we have it today.
He has all the poetic license.
He does, for sure. Probably better than anybody. So the earliest depiction we have of Hecate is this little terracotta statue in Athens. She's sitting on a throne, wearing leaves, offering a maternal blessing, very much still on the bright side of things, all by herself, much more conventional kind of appearance. But shortly after that, she's going to start to transition to this much darker, kind of more watchful self. And she'll appear in this, what we call a triple goddess configuration, which is going to be her sort of iconic look, her signature look, if you like. So 3 versions of herself, all appearing together, full body, all standing around a pole. And in fact, the pole becomes known as the Hecatian. So she's even branding the pole that the 3 versions of herself are standing around.
Nice.
Now, these will become popular statues all over the place. And people will put them at the shrines that they put into crossroads. Fittingly, they'll put them at the entrance to temples, even private homes, to protect over the household. Even Ovid in Metamorphoses cries out and says, look at Hecate standing guard at the crossroads, one face looking at each direction. So she's got a good view to look out no matter where she's looking. Yeah. Now, she's also holding a variety of items in these depictions. She's got the torches I mentioned a second ago. She's got keys, carries some serpents, some daggers. So not just looking out like a mall cop, but really coming with the props, with the tools she needs to get down to business in the interest of guiding and protecting. So she's carrying a lot. We'll learn she's got some animals around her as well, but that's how we learn to see her. And the first of those animals, and probably the biggest of them, her association with the dog. So in fact, I mean, I guess in a strange way, my vision of her with the Chihuahua back in Mexico, not entirely off base.
Yeah. Okay.
And yet the association she has with the dog, we'll see, is very complicated. So in early art and literature, she's actually depicted as being kind of dog-like, shaped like a dog, even having the heads of 3 dogs sometimes. That wears off pretty quickly as we get to the sort of triple goddess version that we get used to. But the dog appears in other places. Anytime she's approaching, you will hear the sound of dogs howling. So it's like we're seeing this is also part of her brand. There's going to be this sort of warning from the dogs that look out, Hecate's coming, like a scary jingle. Because she's known for being a protector, this does make a lot of sense because back then they used guard dogs quite a bit. So the notion of protection dogs very much aligned. So that made sense. And so she's accompanied by them in sound and in her entourage. At the same time, the dog is also her sacrificial animal. So worshippers are regularly burning and eating them in a solemn sacrament.
Wow. I did
So
not
she-
see that coming.
Yes, and this was a very
Warm
popular
up.
thing. Black dogs in particular, they would bring the pick of the litter, and they would have a sacrifice. Some would say that it's a symbol of her connection with birth, and as a result, that people would even prioritize puppies, not just dogs, for these sacrifices to bring, to burn, to consume. It's a strange choice.
Right. Yeah.
I guess the puppies are easier to catch, but much less of a meal, I would think.
Yeah.
So others symbolically will mention these dogs as these manifestations of the restless souls of the underworld who will accompany her. So there's a symbolic value to that. There's another chapter, an explanation of why these dogs are part of her story, which takes us back to the Trojan War. So after the fall of Troy, Queen Hecuba, of course, the wife of King Priam, once the city falls, is in such despair that Troy has fallen, leaps into the sea. But Hecate saves her, and this is getting into the beginnings of her witchy side. Still wants to get some revenge because she's on the other side of the conflict. So she casts a spell to transform the queen into a female dog, as described at the time as a she-dog with fiery eyes. So if you'll forgive the salty language, it is an instance in history where Hecate literally makes the queen her bitch and keeps her on hand as something of a pet. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend that's where the phrase comes from, but it's a literal thing that happens back then. So to her credit, turns the queen into the she-dog, but allows her to remain in the entourage, becomes part of the traveling pack. So
Okay. So her dog. So Queen Hecuba is her.
that's right. Not just a dog, but becomes essentially her dog. And I guess because she's a queen, she's not going to be sacrificed, eaten, any of that stuff. So
Right.
she's part of the club. But that's not where the animal story's at. So beyond the dogs, Hecate's also associated with the polecat, which of course is similar to the ferret, the weasel, maybe the marmot is in the same family. And which takes us back, of course, to episode 5 with the moray, where you mentioned the 3 fates. They were interfering with the maiden Alcmene. She was trying to give birth to Hercules, son of Zeus. Against their wishes, they didn't want to be overruled. And of course, as a favor to Hera, who, as usual, was upset that Zeus was having more children. So the Moirae are so upset at Alcmene's midwife, Galentheus, who's immortal, just trying to deceive them, that they transform her, as you so well put it, into essentially a weasel, a polecat, who, in order to procreate, has to be mounted through the ears and then give birth through the throat, which I think in a program that's had a lot of creative punishments, this one still has got to be top 2 or 3, maybe even the first. They really thought that one through.
Yeah, at the time I assumed it was because that she interfered with their rights over the birthing process.
Exactly. So she was trying to kind of put one over on the Moirae. They weren't having it, and they turned her into this polecat, this unusual weasel. Hecate gets involved in this story, so she sees the transformation into this bizarre little animal, feels bad for Galentheus, and makes her a sacred servant of herself. So she says, all right, you're going to be a polecat, but you can join the club. You can follow us around.
She adopts her,
Yeah. Now, she still has to remain a polecat because, as we will never forget in this program, there are no takebacks in any of this world. So, but as a consolation prize, gets to join the entourage. So score a few points for Hecate for taking on the polecat, the weasel, and in her darkest moment. Now, I'll also mention that Hecate is known for a red mullet. And I know what you're thinking. That is a very unusual choice for a hairdo, particularly in the ancient era.
So you mean an actual mullet?
Well, you would think that.
Yeah.
It is an unusual look, but in fact, I'm referring to the fish, the red mullet. Yes. Right. So we don't have any record of her wearing that as a hairdo. She was not a ginger hockey player. Right. The actual red mullet is the third of her big animal associations. So it is a fish. It refers to 2 different species of a goat fish, Mullus barbatus and Mullus surmulatus. Really just getting the tongue twisters all out tonight.
Yeah, there you go.
But that particular fish delights in eating the polluted things of the sea. So it eats dead fish. It even is known for eating the flesh of human corpses. These fish also turn this very bright red, the color of blood, as it matures. And since Hecate becomes known as very much associated with blood, the fish becomes sacred to her, having all those negative characteristics of being around the dead, being around the deep, the blood. And so it becomes a sacred beast, does this fish. Now, oddly, later on, a lot of the Roman historians, from Cicero, Horace, Seneca, they wrote about something called red mullet fever that attracts all of the wealthiest Romans during those last years of the Republic, the first years of the Empire, which I first read and assumed that was some kind of illness. But in fact, it was more of a social mania, like a cultural trend, a fad.
Okay.
Similar to, I guess, our Pac-Man fever in the 80s.
Right.
But these rich Romans, like, they got obsessed with these red mullets. They got obsessed with how big they could grow them. They would keep them in captivity, and they would enjoy the experience of watching them turn this very deep color of red. And they just really got off on the aesthetics of it. And then they would begin to, like, these rich folks, they would caress the mullets to sort of get their bodies extra big. They would even teach them, and this is all true, they would teach them to come when they called with their keeper's voice. They were training fish to come to be fed with either the voice or the ringing of a bell. Now, this is especially weird because this would take like years to be able to do this, because fish are dumb, but they found a way. In the rare cases that these rich Romans were willing to part with their red mullets and sell them, each one was worth its weight in silver. So this was expensive stuff. So those are the days people bought these giant bloodfish as pets. Now they just buy social networks. Not much has changed, but you can see the connection. So even today, red mullet, while you probably won't see it on many menus, remains a delicacy. People still eat the liver of it. Okay. And it is high in protein, vitamin rich. It's got your omega-3 fatty acids. So I would not look at it look for it on the menu of your local Red Lobster, but it is still making its circulation in the obscure corners of the rich person food world. So that covers the animals. Beyond this weird little coterie of her pets, your edible dogs, your ladies turned into ferrets, your bloodfish, whatever. Hecate is also associated with some sacred plants and poisons. We think particularly of the yew, Y-E-W, which is an evergreen, and her worshipers would drape this yew around a sacrificial black bull. So I guess if they're out of dogs, they get a black bull, maybe for the annual big festival. Drape her in that, and then they would begin a Holocaust. Now that term jumped out at me. Again, that term jumped out at me. I thought, very strange. So apparently Holocaust, we often hear about the Holocaust, but at the time, a Holocaust was a regular term for any kind of burnt offering where you would completely consume the sacrificial offering with fire.
Okay.
So this was, they would take the yew, they would hold a Holocaust, I guess what the verb would be, and they would have this sacrificial burning. Now, they were also very, Hecate was also in favor of garlic in these events and cypress. So they'd be very, very fragrant smell. So it was, I presume, the best smelling Holocaust in town. But that was at least the plant variety of how they would worship her if they didn't have a dog around. Now, I mentioned earlier, Hecate is also known as the goddess of boundaries. And what's interesting is she's able to work her way between worlds. She's very comfortable in any setting. She's the utility infielder of her time. So she can, of course, mediate between the Titans and the Olympians. Since she has family members on both sides, she was able to conduct those conversations. She works very well between the mortal and the divine spheres. And she's what's called a liminal deity, which means she presides over the thresholds, the gates, the doorways. Where are those boundaries between life and death? That's where she always does her thing. So it explains why she's always carrying keys, torches, even a pack of dogs, to make sure that whenever you're in these liminal spaces, these moments of transition, she's there to protect you, to watch over you going from one place to the next. And as I mentioned, you would have shrines to her at homes, doorways, temples, cities, with the belief that those would protect you by being on her good side from the restless dead and the other spirits. Interesting, though, the protection of Hecate was never a guarantee. Sometimes if she wasn't in the right mood, and she'll actively refuse to keep the demons away. She'll withhold the protection, or she will even, in some cases, essentially sick the souls of the dead against you if you've not worshipped accordingly. So she's willing to use the souls of the dead as both a sort of source of protection, but also something of an offensive weapon if you're on her dark side.
It feels sort of par for the course for these guys.
It is. We're seeing some trends start to develop. But this gets to her connection with the underworld. So those keys are symbolic for unlocking the gates of death. Now, Virgil, we'll get back to the underworld, used to describe the entrance to hell as Hecate's Grove, which, I don't know, to me sounds like kind of a nice little park, maybe like a condo development. But based on our previous tellings of the underworld, really anything but. Yeah. She becomes equally powerful in heaven or hell. And I think she's best known probably in the underworld part of the story, in that time where Persephone is abducted by Hades, taken to the underworld. We talked about this one a few episodes back. Her mother, Demeter, seeks help from Hecate to try to find her. And Hecate uses, of course, those torches to search the earth to try to find Demeter's daughter. Persephone searches for 9 whole days, is unable to find her, but still really feels for Demeter and suggests that she talk to Helios, the sun, which also came up earlier, since he sees everything. Now, remember, Hecate is associated with the moon and Helios with the sun. So in a way, they're kind of colleagues, work friends, but she mentions at least he's going to be able to know where she is. And of course, Helios can identify, yep, she's in the underworld. So we know how the story ends. They go down there. Eventually, Hades relents, and Persephone's finally led back to Earth. But it is Hecate and her torches that light the way, that lead her back from the underworld back to the regular Earth. And remember, since she did eat that single pomegranate seed from Hades in the underworld as her little like going away party road snack, Persephone still has to return to the underworld once every year in the wintertime. Hecate is her guide every time. So every time she has to go down, Hecate comes along with her, guides her along, which means she's serving as Persephone's psychopomp, which is an escort from the earth to the afterlife. I just thought that was kind of a cool word. I wanted to work it in. But yeah, psychopomp.
Psychopomp, all right.
Psychopomp. So I mean, it sounds like a great punk band. I don't know what we do with it, but now we have that. So those are the kind of good parts of the reputation. It gets a little darker by the time we get to the 1st century of the Common Era. This whole thing about these liminal spaces, the underworld, and Hecate begins to be associated more and more with the dark arts, with your witchcraft, your magic, your sorcery. And the reputation, I don't want to say goes downhill, it just gets a little uglier. She becomes, sort of takes on her worst potential form. She takes on the form of a hag, which is in fact where we get that word. It's actually from the same root as Hecate's name. Okay. One witch at the time refers to Hecate during this kind of darker reputational period as, quote, a rotting goddess with a pallid, decaying body who has to wear a mask even when she visits the gods in heaven. So apparently she is the only one left with a mask mandate at the time. And I mentioned the triple form. So there's an epithet that she, in fact, shares with your subject, Artemis / Diana. And that epithet is the word trivia. So because she is this triple goddess, trivia is considered, it's almost the original Holy Trinity. So even before the sort of Christian Holy Trinity that we know of today, this would not happen until many years later, because of course the 3rd member had yet to show up and join that band. But it's going to represent some kind of trio. Sometimes it's all 3 aspects of her. It's the sort of huntress, the moon, and the queen of the underworld. Sometimes it's a sort of triple combination of Diana / Artemis, who represents the huntress, Luna, who represents the moon, Hecate, who represents the underworld. So whatever trio they come up with, this becomes this ubiquitous feature. It shows up in all these sacred groves. And it's particularly important at the point of a crossroad, especially where a crossroad splits into 3 different potential diverging paths. So I find it interesting because the crossroads really is, at the time, representative of the most important pivotal moments in your life, like where you really have to make a decision. You have to go from one place to the other. Right. Interestingly, over the years, of course, we know trivia has now come to mean essentially the opposite, the least important stuff possible. So within this obscure mythology podcast, I am now finally connecting over 2,000 years, the reversal of the word trivia from most important to least important. It only took a couple millennia, but Andrew and listeners, you are welcome.
There you go.
Now, Hecate is also a virgin goddess, unmarried over the centuries, had no real known consorts. Of course, these stories always have some kind of exception. In this case, it was Hermes who chased Hecate with the aim of assaulting her, unfortunately. But the goddess then, and I'm quoting here, snored or roared in anger, which frightened him off. So Hermes desisted. It earned her the nickname Brimo, which means angry, and rightly so. Anybody would be. But the fact that it was either a snore or a roar that chased off the mighty Hermes, I think suggests the power that
she has. Yeah.
Could have been a snore, could have been a roar. Either way, dude was out.
He was out. Yeah. Good.
So that's having a full arsenal of tools at your disposal. So wrapping it up, I mean, Hecate, for the details that we can piece together, clearly a goddess of great utility, having this power all over the heavens, the earth, the underworld, has influence both among the mortals and the immortals, has, a lot of beloved followers and who love her and fear her as this protector. She really did push the sort of the dark arts, the boundaries of witchcraft. She is the mother of witchcraft. So a lot of that part of the underworld really does come from Hecate originally. And, for the purposes of this program, whenever we come to a crossroads in life, like our current time, like the impetus of this show, it's good to have her on your side. So there's some points in her favor that says in these important moments, Hecate's good to have. So that's the case. That's the arc of her story. Pretty interesting. Not the kind of big swing for the fences mythology stories that you're used to, but a good supporting character. A little bit of the light and the dark.
She's a dark horse, definitely.
A dark horse is exactly right. She would agree.
She is.
Or a dark dog, depending on the day of the week.
Yeah.
That will close part 1 of our program. Let's take our break. We'll be right back with round 2, and we'll hear about Artemis.
Excellent. So this week I have Artemis, as you've mentioned, and she is goddess of the hunt, goddess of rivers, mountains, protector of newborns and young girls, also bringer of sudden death, and leader of nymphs and girls, and much more. Artemis' name has a couple of different possible origins, including bear, as in the animal, or meaning uninjured or pure. And the Roman version of her name, of course, is Diana, which means divine or heavenly. And as you mentioned in the first half, she's got some connections with Hecate. And it's interesting that you termed her as the light side of Hecate. As we go through these stories, we'll see how well that holds up.
Well, the sudden death is certainly a foreshadowing. Dabbling in darkness to come.
Yes, it's not all light and sunshine here. So, luckily for me, Artemis' origin story was told by Matt in episode 3 with the birth of Apollo, who is, of course, her twin brother.
That's right.
So for anyone who hasn't listened to that episode, I'll give you the very short version here. And that is that Zeus is their father, and the goddess Leto, their mother. Of course, Leto is not his wife Hera, and this provokes a jealous torment against Leto from Zeus's wife Hera, which involves floating islands, a giant lizard monster, but everyone gets through it relatively unscathed, other than the giant lizard monster, who is quite scathed.
Yeah, very scathed. Well, and Leto, I think, still has to give birth to them as fully grown adults wearing armor. So she may have been a touch scathed herself.
She may have had some scathing, yes.
But definitely didn't get it as bad as the monster. So yes. I'll give her that. Yeah.
And as you recounted, Artemis starts her career as in childbirth assistance,
right?
Incredibly early there, assisting in the birth of her twin brother just after she herself is born.
Yes.
And she continues with that precociousness, as did her brother. So while she's still in childhood, she goes to her father Zeus, sits on his lap, makes a couple of requests, which come down to us. She asks never to marry and to remain a virgin. She asks to excel in archery. She asks for a knee-length tunic. So
it's quite a writer. I mean, very specific. Not what I would expect.
So, some of these are larger requests than others. That's maybe the smaller one. She asks for hunting dogs.
Sure.
She asks for 80 immortal attendants.
80?
Yes, 60 ocean nymphs and 20 river nymphs.
I mean, there were a lot of them, so I suppose Zeus could spare even that volume. It's just a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, so and she asks for dominion over all of the mountains. So again, there's a range here from knee-length tunic to dominion over all of the mountains.
Right.
But, and, with a little nod of his head, Zeus grants all of her requests. Now, having said that, these are the pre-delivery days. The only Amazons around were warrior women types
Right.
who were not particularly known for making door-to-door deliveries
No.
of anything save painful death. So Artemis has to go out and get most of these things herself. Say maybe the knee-length tunic, maybe they just brought that one to her.
We'll give you that one kind of out of the gate.
But, with the old man's permission, she goes out. She gets her attendants. She gets her hunting dogs. She gets her bow from the Cyclops. And she also acquires a chariot pulled by stags. So she's got all this, and she's equipped and ready to go out and be a goddess out there on her own. And as a goddess of the hunt, Artemis also has an aspect as a nature goddess, and was especially worshipped in these mountainous areas in the mountainous interior of mainland Greece. And she has association with a bunch of particular mountains and rivers. And that's where she and her retinue of 80 nymphs, plus some mortal female followers, spent most of their time. Of course, being away from civilization doesn't actually end up meaning a lack of drama, most often brought about by men or male gods behaving poorly.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep. So from Pausanias, who's the Greek travel writer we've discussed many times before, one such case developed with the river god Alpheus. So Alpheus is the god of the river Alpheus. So that checks out. And Alpheus was in love with Artemis, but, becomes pretty quickly clear that she's not interested in him in that way. Unfortunately, Alpheus is not respectful of that decision and turns a little bit stalker. So Artemis is going to have an all-night party with her entourage out in the woods. Assuming, after a day of hunting, they're going to have a little gathering.
Sure.
But she's already picked up on Alpheus's creep vibe. So she doesn't want to deal with it. So what she does is she smears her face with mud and has all of her attendants smear their faces with mud. So when he shows up, with the intention of abducting her, he can't figure out who she is, and he just gives up. So now,
clever.
Yes, Alpheus, as it turns out, apparently is a little bit dim as well as being a creep.
Yeah.
Because we are told a number of times that Artemis is a good head taller than any of her attendants. So
you would think just the mud.
The mud, he doesn't. She's the one who's a foot taller than everybody else. Right. But without that knowledge, he is thus thwarted. Now, undoubtedly, it was actually to Alpheus' advantage that Artemis didn't feel like dealing with his BS, because it probably would have gone quite badly for him.
Oh yeah.
Had things gone any further, and it's also generally against Artemis' usual mode of operation, which had a tendency towards wrathful violence. So, famously, one case where the resolution for a trespasser was a tad more confrontational was with Actaeon. So Actaeon was the grandson of Cadmus, founder of Thebes, and Actaeon was an avid hunter. So after a good day's hunt, he's out with his own retinue, ambling through the forest while his men are busy picking up the gear. Practicing a little pack it in, pack it out.
Sure.
Classic. But as the fates would have it, Artemis is also decompressing nearby after a hunt, bathing with her attendants. So Actaeon rounds the corner, and there is a hidden pool where the goddess and her attendants are bathing. And we'll pick this up from Ovid and Metamorphosis. And he says, as soon as he reached the cave mouth, the naked nymphs, seeing a man's face, fill the whole wood with their sudden outcry. They crowd around Artemis to hide her with their bodies. But the goddess stood head and shoulders above all the others. Artemis' face, seen there, while she herself was naked, was the color of the clouds stained by the dawn. So, face turns all red. They're gathering around trying to protect her. Artemis looks for her arrows, but they're too far away. So she grabs a handful of water. All right, and we go back from Ovid, and threw it in the man's face. And as she sprinkled his hair with the vengeful drops, she added these words, harbingers of his coming ruin. Now you may tell, if you can tell, that is, of having seen me naked. Without more threats, she gave the horns of a mature stag to the head she had sprinkled, lengthening his neck, making his ear tips pointed, and changing his feet for hands, long legs for arms, covering his body with a dappled hide. So Actaeon has been turned into a stag, and as he's sitting there, kind of trying to process that fact, that he's changed species, his own hunting dogs catch his new scent and track him down and rip him to pieces.
Brilliant. Bravo. That's fantastic.
Yes. So now, as Ovid presents that situation, it was an accidental look at the naked goddess. Other accounts depict it as more of a deliberate peeping situation, but, we'll probably never know, as Artemis on this occasion was in more of a transform into an animal first, ask questions later mode. And sometimes we're all in that mode.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Given the nature of men in these stories, the accidental thing, I don't buy much into that.
Yeah,
it all seems pretty intentional. So good on her.
So, other versions also have Actaeon bragging about his hunting skills exceeding Artemis. Maybe he did that just as his vocal cords were changing into a deer's. His last words. I'm also a better hunter. And then
just a last wave of hubris before the bestial part kicks in. Yeah.
Yep. And because of situations like this, Artemis is in some ways one of the more polarizing deities that we've come across. And this is reflected in, this disagreement between the various versions of her myths, with different endings painting her in somewhat different lights. There's no disagreement that wrath is the go-to move for Artemis.
Sounds that way.
Just the degrees of the wrath and the justification. So overall, I found 4 main reasons for Artemis to pull out the wrath.
Okay.
Looking at her story. Reason 1 we saw in the Apollo episode, which was any disrespect to the family.
Yeah, that's right.
Especially her mother, Leto.
Yeah.
And that comes up in the Niobe incident, where Artemis makes quick work of Niobe's 7 daughters, while Apollo took the 7 boys.
That's right.
After Niobe had insulted their mother. Hubris, of course, is the second reason for wrath. Arguably, it's an aspect in most of the wrath stories, but one of the most famous cases were her wrath against Agamemnon. Agamemnon is gathering his army and their fleet, getting ready to sail off for Troy. So this is just very beginning of that whole episode. He's going to go help his baby brother get his wife, Helen, formerly of Sparta, back. And the princes are there, and they have a little hunt to build up the camaraderie, a little team-building exercise.
That's right. Yeah, a little offsite. Yeah, I love it.
Before heading off for the war. And actually, they have a very, very good day hunting. Unfortunately for Agamemnon, because he's feeling himself, and he brags that not even Artemis is as good a hunter as he is. So he's already set off the hubris alarms with Artemis. But then he adds to it. That night, there's a sacrifice. And the sacrifice dedicated to Artemis is considered subpar. In one story, it's a pregnant sheep. Now, Artemis, of course, is protector of baby animals. So this is a second affront.
Yeah.
And it detonates another wrath tripwire with Artemis. So that is reason number 3, inadequate homage and sacrifice. And we've learned a lot about exponential growth in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
And so this would appear to be another of those situations where the two offenses multiply each other, and pretty soon we're off the charts with Artemis. So what she does is she convinces Boreas, who is the god of the north wind, to blow into the harbor and keep the Greek fleet bottled up and prevent them from setting sail to Troy. And they keep this up for a while. Eventually, Agamemnon calls in some professional divination, and he's told it's Artemis. You know, she's mad. She's not going to let the fleet set sail unless you sacrifice your youngest daughter.
Oh.
So Agamemnon, being Agamemnon, says, okay, as long as it's not me. And he goes out to the cliffs. He gathers a crowd of the Greek soldiers who are waiting to go off to Troy, and brings out his daughter, Iphigenia. He was told that it's going to be announced who she's betrothed to, and that's why they're having this big ceremony. So
it's a fake out already.
Yeah, so he gets up there, and they have the priests and the sacrificial knives, and Iphigenia is no dummy. She figures out, you know, what's about to happen.
Yeah.
She cries out. She's looking around imploringly, but nobody can meet her eye, and all the Greek soldiers just look away. They can't watch. And then Agamemnon kills her, placating Artemis. Or maybe not. Aeschylus, in his story of this, he's the Greek playwright, has Iphigenia die there because it's important to the plot of his plays. But other stories have Artemis come in at the last moment and swoop Iphigenia away, making her one of her priests around the Black Sea, or making her an immortal member of her entourage.
So Aeschylus knew what a better ending would be there, I think. The original ending, the historical ending, less dramatically satisfying.
Yes, so that in his version, when he comes back from the Trojan War, his wife, Clytemnestra, is waiting there and has been plotting to get her revenge for 10 years. So that's the third wrath trigger, which we saw perhaps with the Iphigenia story about the lack of proper sacrifice, indicating a lack of proper respect for Artemis. But the quintessential story on Artemis' wrath due to improper sacrifice is actually the Caledonian boar. So again, via Ovid in the Metamorphosis, we get this. The king of Caledon, they say, made offerings from a successful harvest of a full year, of the first fruit of the crops to Demeter, of wine to Dionysus, of oil from the olives to the golden Athena. Honor they desire was paid to all the gods, beginning with the rural deities. Only Artemis' altar was passed by, neglected.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so Artemis basically says, yeah, I'm not going to stand for this. And she's spurned, and she sends an avenging wild boar. So I'm going to give Ovid's description of the wild boar, because I think you have to kind of... this is not a regular wild boar. So Ovid says, its eyes glowed with bloodshot fire. Its neck was stiff with bristles. The hairs on its hide bristled stiffly like spear shafts. Just as the palisade stands, so the hairs stood like tall spears. Ovid really wants us to get that its hairs were like spears.
Just so we're clear on that.
Yeah. Yes. he's a couple times. So he goes on, he says, hot foam flecked from the broad shoulders, from its hoarse grunting. Its tusks were the size of an elephant's. Lightning came from its mouth, and leaves were scorched by its breath. So This is not Babe, Pig in the City. No. It's not Wilbur. This is a monster in the shape of a boar.
Yes.
That's been sent by Artemis. And it tears through the crops that are waiting to be harvested. It tramples the grain. It tears down the grapevines, brings down the olive branches and olive trees, then goes after the cattle, and the people are forced to hide behind the walls of the town unable to take in the harvest. So the king calls upon the local hero, Meleager, to kill the boar, who we met in episode 5. And Meleager assembles an all-star team of Greek heroes of that time, which is kind of the generation right before the Trojan War, including the female huntress, Atalanta. So the hunt is a bloody affair. A number of the heroes are killed. Artemis intervenes a couple times on the boar's side just to prolong everything. Eventually, it's Atalanta who draws first blood, and Meleager who kills the boar. Now, this will go into what happened in episode 5, but a fight ensues over the trophies from the kill, ultimately with tragic results. So that's reason number 3. Now, reason number 4 for wrath was protecting her virginity and the virginity of her retinue. And we saw that with Actaeon, as well as some undoubtedly more clearly guilty men, as well as some of her followers. The followers generally just get booted out of the club, unless they hide their actions, in which case they risk, at least in one case, being transformed into a bear.
Yeah. So the cover up sometimes being worse than the would-be crime.
Yes, exactly. And a side note on Atalanta, her backstory is an example that shows the non-wrath side of Artemis. In this case, lending a hand to someone. Atalanta was exposed as an infant, left to die by her father. So Artemis, who is the protector of infants, handles the situation by sending in a she-bear to nurse the baby, as one does.
Sure.
Until eventually some hunters find the baby and raise her as a huntress, which she excelled at quite a bit. So that is the other side to Artemis as the benefactor. She also has a habit of adding girls who have died in heroic or unjust ways to her retinue, granting them immortality by apotheosis. A girl named Britomartis, who died fleeing her would-be attacker, was added. Heracles' daughter, who died sacrificing herself for the city of Athens, and of course, perhaps Iphigenia, who died because her dad was a braggart who really wanted to sack Troy.
Yeah.
So, and you know, as you said, there, even though Artemis is renowned as a virgin goddess, there is at least one potential love story for Artemis. There are many versions of the story about Orion, the hunter, but one version of Orion, he was the only man who Artemis could maybe, possibly, potentially one day see herself maybe falling in love with.
Okay.
Now, that would have violated her oath of chastity. So Artemis' twin brother, Apollo, decides that there are indeed no takebacks in the mythological world. Right. So he solved this problem not by, taking anyone aside, talking about the possible repercussions, reasoning through the situation, and actually not by killing Orion. So what he does is he goes to Orion and he challenges him to swim out as far as he can into the Aegean Sea. And Orion wants to impress Apollo, who thinks,
Sure.
well, he's a god and he might be my future brother-in-law.
That's
so
right.
He swims way, 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 way out. And then Apollo calls Artemis down to the beach and starts challenging her archery prowess. And she's prideful. She gets worked up. So Apollo says, I bet you can't hit that tiny dot
No.
out there on the horizon. And of course, Artemis shoots and hits the target, realizing afterward that it was Orion when his body washes up to shore.
Brutal.
And then she makes him the famous constellation with the prominent belt in her grief.
That's some consolation prize, I guess. But
Yes.
come on, man. Talk about just just crappy sibling rivalry right there. That
Well,
is ruthless.
Of course, Artemis doesn't let it rest there.
Well.
In retaliation, she kills Apollo's girlfriend, Cronus,
Okay.
who is the mother of Asclepius.
Yes.
So I guess that's actually the fifth reason for wrath, tricking her into killing her crush with an arrow.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad that story didn't just end there. And it doesn't feel like, knowing what we know now about Artemis, that she would just shrug her shoulders and walk away. So
No.
that feels right.
Yeah, I think that one works out. So in terms of worship, there are many shrines to Artemis all over the Greco-Roman world. Ephesus, which is in Asia Minor, now Turkey, had a giant temple to Artemis, considered to be one of the wonders of the ancient world. In Athens, there was a festival on her behalf with a parade where girls 5 to 10 would dress in saffron robes of some sort and kind of a bear costume and, quote, act the bear. And this was to appease the goddess after she had sent a plague on the town because a bear sacred to her had been killed. So I guess that's actually the sixth wrath trigger.
This list is
it just keeps going.
Pretty extensive.
Killing her bear. And then Diana in the Roman tradition had a temple in Rome and in the hills outside of Rome in a place called Nemi. And Nemi had a tradition of offering refuge to escaped slaves and fugitives. Mm-hmm. And in legend, at least, the head priest of the Nemi temple was always an escaped slave. And the only way to become the new head priest of Nemi was to challenge the current head priest in one-on-one combat to the death.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
So that's Artemis, goddess of the hunt, nature lover, defender of girls, prideful goddess, and lover of wrath.
Lover of wrath. Wow. Well, I'll tell you, my entire worldview of one of these cats split to the left and one to the right in terms of light and dark, that whole paradigm is completely overturned now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, this will be quite a battle in our coming categories. So let's gear up for those, and we'll rejoin with our 5 questions right on the other side of this break.
All right, and now we are set for the 5 categories. We have 5 categories which will help us determine which of these goddesses moves on to the Golden Goat round. First category being immortal combat. And that is, of course, a physical confrontation between these 2 goddesses. And I'll go first with the good and bad of Artemis. So, obviously, Artemis was very skilled with a bow. Hit a little tiny dot way out there in the ocean.
Yeah, nailed it,
yeah. Also the spear.
Mm-hmm.
She had hunting dogs, which, are special, keen, amped up hunting dogs.
Yeah, they've got skills.
Yeah, had a chariot pulled by stags, assuming it was pretty fast. Sometimes when we have these discussions, we worry about the deity's willingness to fight or their and I don't think that's an issue here.
Without question in this category.
I think she's set to go.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Making of that case, yes.
Right. And we actually have 2 stories where she fought a couple of formidable opponents. So this one, which I'll give kind of briefly, Poseidon apparently had 2 sons who were giants called the Elodai. And the boys, according to the legend, grew 2 feet wider every year and 6 feet taller every year.
Okay.
So by the time they were 9, they're 18 feet across and 54 feet tall.
Don't make me do that math in Roman numerals. I can't do it. Sounds big.
Yeah, they're pretty big, and they decided to, as 9-year-olds, to storm Olympus.
Sure. That's a tough target. Even.
And it was said that the 2 were invulnerable to everyone except each other.
Oh, wow.
So Artemis transforms herself into a deer and runs between them. And they both throw their spears at the deer and missing her, but hitting and killing each other.
I love it. Just good smarts in the moment. Good strategy. Well done.
transforming yourself into deer. But there's one that takes a little bit of the shine off that story. So in the Iliad, Artemis has a fight with Hera. She's taunting Hera. She's yelling at her, and Hera comes down, takes the bow out of Artemis's hands, and whacks her upside the head with it a couple times, sending her crying to her mother. So,
not quite the operatic level of violence that I've grown accustomed to over the course of this episode, but no. Sometimes you just need a whack upside the head, don't you?
Yeah. So some good and some bad.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Hecate, has the feather in her cap of slaying the giant Clytius back in the Gigantomachy, using her torches. So clearly those are powerful weapons, not just for looking out and trying to find things, but waging war. There are some accounts, and we talked about the traditional, the known story of getting Persephone out of the underworld, where Hades essentially allowed it to happen. Hermes was part of that mix. There are some accounts in some ancient artwork that actually have Hecate rescuing Persephone on her own from the underworld single-handedly.
Okay.
And she's pictured cleaving the earth and leading her out so she could escape. So I don't think that's the predominant narrative. That's more of the alternate history version of it. But there's some strength and some power to that as well, if there's any truth to it. One advantage in Immortal Combat is that there are 3 of her, which is always good in a fight. So if you're coming down to hand-to-hand combat and you have 6 hands, that's an advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
The advantage in terms of peripheral vision would be very good if you can look in every direction at once. So she's got that. I too like to consider the entourage. And you mentioned the chariot and some of those aspects. In this case, I don't know, the angry little dog, the polecats, the bloodfish. I don't think they're going to help a whole lot in this battle.
Yeah, the bloodfish. I don't know.
No, I mean, they could dispose of a corpse afterward, but in terms of waging the actual battle, very, very little help. They might be able to come when you call them if you've trained them for years, but they'll expect to be fed. So not much help there. And I guess, my initial thought on this was, since in my previous thinking, Hecate and Artemis had so much in common at the beginning and then sort of devolved into the light and the dark. I was going to pose this profound philosophical question of, well, it really just kind of comes down to, what do you believe in? Who's going to win, good or evil? And clearly it's not as simple as one of those 2 binary choices for either of those. But I have to say, while there is great power in the sort of witchcraft notion, and while Hecate is very well respected and well renowned for the protective aspect that she provides, the actual instances of her doing, accomplishing things with the witchcraft are fairly modest. It is a sort of, well, I'll turn you into an animal, but you can still stay my pet. So I feel like as we've discussed before, there's the weapon, and then there's the willingness to really use it to its maximum capacity. And in this case, I feel like there is great strength to the witchcraft, but we don't have examples of it being used in that advantageous a way,
right,
in a one-on-one confrontation. So given all that, given the several instances of very impressive strategic, wrathful moves, I definitely have to give Artemis the edge on this one.
Right. Yeah. I think that idea of which one's the light, which one's the dark is maybe more complicated than
a little bit. Yes. I think if we take any lesson away from this program, that is always the case. But even among mixed bags, I think that mixed bag is weighted more heavily toward Artemis in terms of one-on-one combat.
Oh yeah. I that part I don't think is that complicated. The Hera thing's a little embarrassing, but I don't think Hecate rises to that to that level. I'm going to give it to Artemis on this one.
Very good.
All right. And in our second category, we have curriculum deity, which is which goddess would you rather be? Which one would you rather follow? Who has the biggest it factor?
Right.
And I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah. So as far as who I'd rather be, I mean, I would love to have 3 of myself. We can get behind that. I think there's, a little extra food, a little extra laundry, but it would be made up for in just the productivity, the ability. There's so much you could pull off if you had if you lived in triplicate. So there's some points there. I also envy Hecate's ability to feel comfortable everywhere in every part of the universe. These days I really only enjoy being at home, maybe Wrigley Field, maybe Napa from time to time. That's kind of it. Everywhere else I'm fairly uncomfortable. So the ability to just move in and out, to be this sort of liminal person who can deal with any person, any place. I have some envy for that.
Yeah.
It would come in handy to be able to give spells, to cast spells, to keep demons away, to sick demons on people. Again, not a huge amount of stories where that's done. But it's nice to think about.
Yeah.
If I get a little wrathful, if I could just sort of wrestle up some demons and throw that in the mix, that would be great. Then again, Hecate does spend a decent amount of time in the underworld, which, as we've talked about many times before, seems like a real drag. So that's just a place you don't want to spend a lot of time. That's a big part of her job. That's not great. Being a lifelong virgin, also, as we've talked about before, not really what I would hope for myself. That's gonna even out, I think, in this competition, that aspect of it, clearly. When the occasional attacker can be either roared or snored away, that's good. But other than that, I don't think I'd want that life. And I would not care. I'll be on the record for this. I would not care for people burning or eating puppies in my name. I will say that publicly. No, thank you. So mixed bag on B. In terms of following, Hecate her call was a pretty big deal in terms of longevity. Now, she had shrines everywhere, but it was more of like a franchise model. There were these small shrines at the crossroads and the home, as we talked about, lots of temples all over Greece.
Yep.
There was a big one at Legina in Greece, which was essentially her own theocratic city-state, had a huge festival every year. I call it the original trivia night, which I think I'm sure it was part of the branding. It was served year-round by eunuchs, which is always a good time. Those guys know how to throw a party.
Yeah.
But she was sort of franchised out to other temples, so that she would have an altar in the temple for Apollo or the temple for Athena. So there was always sort of an installation, like a round altar in her name. So there was lots of she was in many places. So good availability, good convenience if I'm thinking about worshiping.
Right.
Again, from a branding perspective, kind of has it all. She's got these great symbols. She's got her signature sound. Her statue is essentially a piece of branded merchandise that you can put all throughout your home. Great annual event, the occasional magic shows. So a lot to like in terms of being the person or the deity that I'm worshiping.
Yeah.
More importantly, though, the worship of Hecate is not an abstract concept, because as the mother of witchcraft, witchcraft remains in practice today. Right. So to this day, there are people among us who are worshiping Hecate, to this very day. In fact, a little bit of research I found, they describe it not as worshiping, but working with Hecate.
All right. Yeah.
Like they're, hiring a consultant or a freelance. Like, you should work with Hecate. She's all right. What they say is, the language is something like, whether or not you've chosen Hecate as your maternal goddess or not, she's a powerful deity to work into your magical practice. So the internet is full of tips for active witches to give them suggestions. Like, hey, make a little altar in your home for Hecate, or, do a ritual at a crossroads, practice good canine care, which I was relieved to see involves, either taking good care of your pet, or if you need to make a donation to a local shelter, even better. So more of a 21st century canine care type of worship.
Yes. Than
the old ways.
2nd century BC.
Yeah. Yes. So, it's fascinating. I do think that there's enough to like about Hecate as a follower that she remains in that practice today. Yeah. Again, it wouldn't really be my bag necessarily, but plenty of witches today feel differently. So I'll give her props for that.
All right. Very interesting. So on this one for Artemis, she very much had the entourage. She had the 20 nymphs, the naiads, who were the river nymphs, and those were her hunting companions. Mm-hmm. They would actually go on the hunt. And then there's the 60 oceanid nymphs, and they're more like for the party afterwards, and they're kind of taking care of base camp.
Right.
Plus, she had various other mortal girls who would be invited into this, or immortal girls that she had made into immortals. She lives out in the forest. It's kind of a lot of camping, lots and lots of camping. It's permanently camping. So, I enjoy camping. I don't know if I want to live out there,
I
but
mean,
that's,
if you had like 80 assistants, it would be
yeah,
much
there you
more
go. Yeah.
pleasant. Yeah.
You're probably not roughing it that much,
No,
really.
I'm sure it would be better than the camping trip that you and I took in 1993. We won't go. That's off the
No, we will
topic
not
for
go into
this.
that.
But we had
Yeah.
no assistance. In fact, negative assistance. But please.
Yeah. She has dec decent family relationships, despite some maybe sibling dysfunction in the
Yeah, you
in
could say
the
that.
in the Orion incident. Got some anger issues
Yeah, yeah.
that she's kind of working through. And then on the following side, I mentioned there's that festival in Athens with the little girls dressed up as bears, which seems like kind of an adorable little
Sure.
festival,
Yeah.
Um, there was another in Sparta where teen boys were whipped on the altar to cover it with blood in order to recall earlier human sacrifices.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So a variety of types of
Yeah. So,
themes then. Yeah.
and then we get one from Pausanias, and this is a festival in the town of Patras.
Hmm.
And he says, on the first day, people walked up in procession of greatest grandeur for the goddess. A virgin priestess was brought up the rear, riding a chariot which was drawn by tame yoked deer. And the next day, living animals were sacrificed, including edible birds, boars, deer, gazelles, wolves, bears. An altar was set on fire, and the animals were forced out by the first leap of the flames, or escaping, were then thrown back into the fire to their death by the crowd.
So you get one escape, but after that,
Yes.
no reduce. Yeah.
Yeah. But though, according to Pausanias, there was no record of injury by any of the animals. So,
Okay.
so that's not my kind of really festival.
No. Doesn't sound like a good jam. No.
No, not real pleasant on that one. So it's kind of a mixed bag on this. One question on the art on Hecate, you got the three.
Yeah.
Like, can one of them do the work for you? And then
I assume so. We don't have records to give us a lot of detail on that, but
yeah, you choose to be one of the ones that's not working.
Well, importantly, they were always pictured they were still separate bodies just standing around the pole. So it wasn't like they were, conjoined triplets where they would just have to drag each other around. They were clearly still autonomous beings. So I would assume one could just take a week off, the other could do the chores. You could work it out.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna go with Hecate on this one.
Really?
Yeah, I think I am.
I don't think I will join you there. I think I'm actually going with Artemis on that one. I think all that great companionship, all the outdoors, a lot of good in her world, at least having, I don't get the sense that Hecate had much in the way of family or friends. I think there were worshipers, there were sort of colleagues like Helios, or, in a strange way, Hermes and Hades, which was definitely more of a frenemy situation given their misdeeds. But she seems kind of lonely. And I feel like that was a big part of why she was consistently cooking up ways to cast spells and get into the dark arts. So I think all those things, all being said, I think Artemis gets my vote on this one.
All right. So we have a draw. So one for Artemis and one draw, and that brings us to our third category, which is good God. And I'll take the lead on this one. Again, another mixed bag here. Artemis had some really important duties regarding childbirth, protecting infants. Though, of course, in some cases, with all these, she would choose not to.
Yes,
and be the bringer of sudden death. If something wasn't quite to her liking. Obviously, there's a lot of wrath, but it has various degrees of justification in different cases. So sometimes it's a just vengeance, and she added those girls, who clearly got a raw deal to her retinue.
Sure.
Gave them immortality. And Diana had a festival in that Nemi temple outside of Rome, the procession from Rome to Lake Nemi, and that was a sanctuary for outlaws and enslaved people. And that was actually a mid-August festival, but it was, interestingly, shared with Hecate.
Is that right?
So, yeah, so they had that festival, but it was, a sanctuary that took care of outlaws and then formerly enslaved people. So
big character points for that.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, well, mixed bag on Hecate's side too. I think clearly mostly a protector, with the occasional, as we said, darker spell, and similar to Artemis, if she wanted to withhold her protection, she certainly had that right and would occasionally exercise it. She scores points for helping both Demeter and Persephone in their times of need. Clearly, they were both on the short end of the stick and needed help, and she helped them both out, and continued to, in the case of Persephone and being her, again, psychopomp. So there's some points there. Mostly a friend of the animals, I think, in the case of sure, she'd turn you into a dog, but she'd make you her pet. And the other side of the dog story a little bit less, but I can't entirely blame her for that. The people knew that was important to her, the sacrifice element of it. It's unclear how she reconciled both of her love of dogs and their utility in her worship. Clearly a connector of different places, different people, as that liminal god who could exist in all these different environments. And again, the fact that she turned the Queen of Troy into a mean dog, but took her on afterward, shows that she's got both the sort of balance of vengeance and, I guess, compassion in the end. This is a tough one because it almost comes down to a philosophical battle of what character means in terms of, is it about maintaining the status quo and being a protector, or is it more about having a firm set of principles that you will actively exercise to achieve something good in the world? I think that the latter of those two feels to me like the better definition of character, much more active, even if it's not a perfect record. I think in that case, I think Artemis gets my nod on this one. Not to say that there wasn't a lot of good in where Hecate was coming from, but I think everybody can agree there was a good and a bad side to her. Whereas in the case of Artemis, it feels like she was motivated by important principles. She stood her ground. She always had reasons for doing what she did. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, you have, I think, and it is one of the things that still cool Artemis is right. So you have the Niobe thing where both her and Apollo come out pretty poorly, really. And then you have the Iphigenia thing, and it's like, well, which version kind of do you really believe about that?
Right.
Did she grant her immortality, or did she just say, all right, well, I'm gonna punish your dad by having him sacrifice you? So it's a tough one to kind of think what's the most consistent version of her, and then again, you said if we're inviting somebody back, is a little bit of a loose cannon,
a wild card,
a little bit of a wild card, coming back, but she does have that sense of righteousness and a harsh justice. So I guess I'm gonna go with Artemis here, even though it bucks a little bit of our trend of not rewarding the wrathfulness, but
for good principles,
Yes. So
stand up for the family, mostly.
Yeah. So all right, good. That brings us to iconography, and I believe that this one, have you take Hecate first?
Yeah. So one interesting little lasting notion of her legacy is that in a strange way, she's responsible for the term jinx, but it's in a very unexpected way. So there's a medieval commenter who was talking about this, and it's similar to some of those Ovid tellings where it really is the richness of the language that gets the point across. There's something about this phrase that I would never have been able to write, but it really jumps off the page. So the jinx was a device that Hecate would wield, an instrument, if you will. And it is, and I'm quoting, a bull roarer consisting of a golden sphere decorated throughout with symbols and whirled on an oxhide thong. Now, it's not clear what she did with this, but it wasn't going to be good. She would whirl this sort of sphere on a, so it's only associated really with Hecate. You don't hear really about this instrument in any other parts of history because apparently the whole golden ball whirled around in a thong didn't quite catch on as a weapon for others. But it was known, at least in the original Greek, as a jinx. So whatever it did, it put some sort of spell on you that wasn't going to be good.
Okay.
Even so, this interesting story, the lasting nature of the legacy, since not many of us are wielding modern day jinxes, debatable. Certainly her influence lasted much longer, as we said, than the ancient gods. We talked about some of the modern day. Since you chose her as your preference to worship, I invite you. I have a series of websites that I bookmarked that I can give you immediate advice if you'd like to do that yourself.
Take that up,
yeah. But even dating into somewhat modern times, there was an emerging legend complex that was called the Society of Diana, where these legions of women would get together. And this is in northern Italy, southern Germany, the Western Balkans, and they would gather around the moon, they would do their witchcraft, and it went into like the early 1800s. So it was a fairly pronounced movement, had a very good run for all the centuries after that. So clearly a lasting influence there. I do have to, this may have some overlap because since it was the Society of Diana, Artemis is sort of part of that club too. So we have to kind of split the credit on that one.
Right.
But it also leads us to something called the Blackburn Cult in 1929 Los Angeles, which they went old school. There was a legit cult in the late 20s in LA that decided to do it the old way. They did the dog sacrifices. They took one of their so-called queens, buried her body, and burned it along with the sacrificed dogs. It was broken up because it was running very afoul of American law, even at that time. But it's pretty fascinating that even that late into history, they're looking back at the old ways, and there were enough kooks out there who were still going to practice that. So that is a legacy.
It's something.
Yeah. Big in the witchcraft world, you've got modern witchcraft, neo-paganism, Wicca. And beyond that, not as prominent a legacy in terms of the name carried forward. You do see a lot of, the common answers to this question among some of these other deities, where you've got, Hecate is the name of an Australian feminist academic journal, naturally. I'm sure we both subscribe to that. There's a few Royal Navy ships. There's an asteroid named after, and there is a French sniper rifle.
All right.
Now, normally this would be my cue to make some kind of tongue-in-cheek joke about the French military. I'm not going to do that this time. We're on the good side of the French. They did good this week, so I'm going to respectfully leave that joke out of it and say,
excellent.
Wield your French sniper rifle Hecates as much as you like, my French friends. So a decent smattering of legacy there in terms of long lastingness. There's some power, but not as earth shattering as some of our other contestants.
And you probably wouldn't have come across this one. I have one that I've come across in my daily life because I have a daughter. In the latest version of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, in one of the later seasons, they trade their worship of Satan for Hecate.
Oh, I mean, that's I guess that's better.
Yes, it's a female coven, and they just feel like that's more in their style. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is true. There are kind of versions of that name in Dune, which I read and saw the movie of last year. Yep. There's a version of that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, often a branch with Ms. Marvel, I believe. So it's a common sort of vessel that some of these characters can fill, but not really the incarnation of Hecate, which sounds like is the literal version that you're describing.
Yeah. Yes.
So thank you for catching me up on that. I'm way behind on my Sabrina, and I thank you for catching me up.
There you go. All right. So I think I'll start with Artemis. And of course, the Roman name Diana is actually a fairly common girl's name, one that you're not going to look foul at anybody who's named Diana.
Definitely not.
It peaked around 42nd in 1946 in the United States, and currently it is around the 200th most used name for babies in the U.S., and Artemis actually is 960th.
Okay,
so it's hitting the top 1,000.
I gotta believe that that's still way better than Hecate. So
yeah,
unless there's more neo-paganists reproducing and honoring her with their the naming rights to their child than I suspect, but probably not.
Yeah. So we have, obviously Princess Diana, Diana Ross.
Sure. Great.
And the name Diane also comes from them. In terms of popular culture, there's the book and 2020 movie Artemis Fowl. But Artemis Fowl has very little actually to do with Artemis. Artemis Fowl is a 12-year-old genius boy, descended from a long line of criminal masterminds. And the movie from 2020 got an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That wasn't Warshawski's, was it?
I couldn't answer that.
8%. Well, I know that that's not good.
Yes, that is the lowest I think
puts
I've
the
ever
foul
seen.
back in Artemis Fowl.
Yes, it's very much so. Artemis is the name of a villainous character on the TV show Arrow, which I believe is one of the Marvel franchise. There is an Artemis air gun for hunting deer.
Okay.
Of course. There is a very expensive pistol named after Artemis, so that one is high cost per kill.
Yeah.
So it's like a $6,000 pistol.
And I assume that there's some sort of holster for all of these.
Yeah, I would assume so.
That's good. Good.
In a little bit different vein, Artemisa is a family of plants, also known as wormwood, and artemisinin is a malaria treatment discovered by a female Chinese scientist who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2015 for the treatment of malaria.
That's great.
That's a good one.
Wow.
And I think it was Hades we said who had a mention in the New Testament. Artemis also does.
Oh yeah.
In the book of Acts, in the New Testament, has a call out to Artemis, and it mentions her temple at Ephesus. Apparently, some statue makers thought that Paul, the apostle, was being disrespectful to Artemis, so they started a riot.
Artemis herself does not appear.
No, she does not appear.
Illusion. Okay, so
it's more of an
not
illusion.
Full on crossover potential here. Okay.
No, people, the statue makers making statues of her enacted some of their own wrath on Paul for interfering with business.
Yeah, she'd approve of that. Seems in character for the boss.
Yeah. So and there is the Artemis Moon program. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
That rings a bell. Yeah.
Yeah. So this aims to return people to the moon by 2025, and Artemis 1 is planning to launch later this year.
Really?
And the plans include establishing an Artemis base camp on the moon.
That would not be in 2025. That would be more of a long range plan.
Yes, I believe that's the ultimate goal that they're working towards. But
outstanding. I hope they succeed.
So that is that's what I had on Artemis.
Well, I do believe that wormwood, I think, is the central ingredient of, is it absinthe?
No,
I believe so. There's something there, and I can't believe you didn't mention the much derided men's cologne Artemis.
I've never
maybe this is again more my department than yours, but having some fragrance experts in the family. But yeah, there's I shouldn't say much derided. There, a lot of I believe young men kind of get flack for wearing Artemis a little too much of it in their teenage years.
Okay.
Polo black, Dakar Noir, it's sort of in that category. But I should say they do make excellent products now, and they're very high end fragrances. So not as high end as Chanel, for the record, but Artemis does well.
Excellent. All right. So I feel like this one, it seems to me pretty clear that this is Artemis's.
I think you're exactly right. Yep. I think that's it's a route. Right. That one's not even close. I mean, all due respect to the continuation of witchcraft to this day, but grand scheme of things, I think Artemis takes that one.
Yeah. Mainstream. I think that's the case. All right, and then the last one we have is Matinee Idol, and that is who would make the better movie of their life, and we've kind of liberalized this one somewhat as we've gone around. gone along, a little less directly a retelling, and sort of
Interpretation, right?
yeah. In that vein, I'm going to go a little bit on the allegorical side here.
Okay.
So, setting is a college sorority, Rho Alpha Theta, and Diana is a fifth, maybe sixth year senior. No one's really sure. There's sorority
we knew
pictures,
a few of those. Yeah.
from the 90s, even the 70s, with members that look, suspiciously like Diana. Probably relatives though. So the sorority is sort of the underdogs on campus. They always take the innocent, little less worldly, little nerdy girls into the sorority. But most people know not to mess with the girls of Rho Alpha Theta because they're legends about what happens when you do bad things.
Bad things. No
So
bueno.
So this is actually, I'm kind of thinking really set about more of a horror movie
Sure.
sort of aspect. So inevitably some people do mess with the girls of Rho Alpha Theta and their wrathful consequences. And but like many horror movies, there's also this sense of horror as revenge with some justification.
Sure.
We've got maybe a male student spies ritual bathing ceremony that the sororities have, and that has disastrous results.
Cinematic gem right there.
Yeah, for him, maybe an athletic director is enticed to sacrifice his daughter for a football championship.
Whatever it takes to win.
Yeah. All building up to the conjuring of a boar monster that rampages through campus after the sorority's homecoming float is disrespected and not given even an honorable mention.
Oh, bad idea.
Eventually fought off by a sorority member, Addie, and her male companion, Mel. And that's kind of, and that's the movie. So
good. I would totally watch that movie. Very nice.
So.
Well, for the Hecate side, I can't help but keep going back. Maybe it's the sentimental part of me, but keep going back to that original version that I had in my head of Hecate back in Mexico, right? So I'm visioning a TV series. I'm calling it Hecate from Tecate. And I recognize I'm changing the pronunciation, but Shakespeare can do it. So as a
so
co-host of a very popular podcast, I feel I have the same artistic license. So Hecate from Tecate. I can say from Tecate because as I understand it, Tecate itself is just kind of a border town. So I would have her relocate to sort of Puerto Vallarta where there's beaches and much more cinematic and more picturesque. So Hecate begins as a happy-go-lucky gal on the beach. She's enjoying the sun. She's surrounded by her entourage. She's got her adored Chihuahua next to her. She's got her polecat. Maybe the two of them can sort of be comedic foils. Maybe they can talk, have funny accents, and sort of tell jokes. And life is good. They're enjoying Tecates by the sea. They're in a life of leisure. But over time, of course, her adventures, like that of the goddess that inspired her, will grow darker. And she finds her way to what is essentially the underworld of Mexico, cartel country. And then over time, throughout the series, and it is, I think, an ongoing streaming series like Breaking Bad, we slowly watch her transition from sunny socialite to become the witch warrior of the night, taking down cartel villains one by one. And just as Walter White, of course, in Breaking Bad had his methods, every time Hecate needs to dispose of a body, she's able to, with her voice, summon her fleet of red mullets who take care of business and eliminate the bodies in a stunning cinematic flash of bright red. Very cinematic. And then her duty being done, she returns to the beach and enjoys a cold Tecate with some high product placement potential here, as you can see, along with some flautas and some guacamole. Now, for casting, I as Hecate, I can't help but see Julia Louis-Dreyfus, comedic legend, mainly because as Elaine on Seinfeld, her favorite Eagles song was, of course, Witchy Woman, which seems like a natural fit.
Right.
And the beauty of the show is like Hecate herself. Some episodes are very light and bright and funny, others much more dark, because as we've talked about, the goddess is very comfortable in both worlds. And let's face it, when you're watching a show, sometimes you want something that's a little bit light and comedic. Sometimes you want something more serious. You got to be in the right mood for the show. So because it's on a streaming service, you can actually choose which of the episodes that you would like to watch at any given time, a bright one or a darker one. The streaming service brings up a menu and allows you to choose a path. And of course, the interface for that path is a crossroads.
Oh, yeah.
Choose your adventure. So Hecate from Tecate, streaming soon on either AMC Plus or more likely the Tecate Lager YouTube channel, rife with product. Yeah, we got two winners there. I think both highly commercially full of potential. I think as far as longevity goes, I do appreciate the sort of the descent into darkness storyline that's done us so well in Breaking Bad. Yet I think cinematically, your story is full of so many great tropes and full of so many collegiate men behaving badly that I think it both rings true with the real world and has endless supply for both comedy and drama. So I think I will give the sorority girls the edge on my vote. But I will keep the other in the back pocket in case I need to make a endorsement deal with the good people of Tecate down the road.
All right. Yeah, that's it. It is an interesting choice, I think, because I think that's a little something different with the Hecate from Tecate, but there's some good tropes in this one. But I think I'm going to go with Hecate from Tecate. I want to see that. I want to see that made. So
from your mouth to Hollywood's ears, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Well,
so I was not able to get any meetings when I was out there.
Hey, once this goes viral, it won't be a problem. So you've been taking the tally. I assume that Artemis got the edge.
Yes. Yes, she did. So in fact, it is 3-0 with 2 draws.
Okay. So pretty significant margin of victory there. Not entirely surprising, given this is a clash between an Olympian and a much sort of lesser deity, but an entertaining journey nonetheless. And
very much so.
A learning experience that sometimes people you think are similar can be very different in their own ways. Fantastic. Well, folks, that will do it for episode 7. Until next time, when we hit those quadruple digits for episode 8, thank you for listening. We are available everywhere you want us. Still waiting on the folks at Pandora. Come on, guys. We've been waiting for a week. Get on it. Like, subscribe, leave a review. Good review.
Rate everywhere.
Rate everywhere. That's a great call. And leave 5-star reviews if you feel that way. We don't want to influence, but if you are feeling the entertainment value, please let that be known. Tell your friends. Find us on Twitter. The website is godversusgod.com, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and the official God vs. God playlist remains on Spotify, where every episode we add 2 more songs to match the episode behind it. Any parting words, my friend?
I said rate and review. I actually have no personal knowledge that helps, but every other podcast I've listened says that it does.
50 million podcasts can't be wrong. Good. All right. Well, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure, my friend. And thanks as always to Andy Snow for the theme music. He will play us out. Until next time, see ya. God versus God. So long.
Bye.